Your mom was some big hero, huh? Sure, kid. And I'm the president, the cadet sneered, his voice loud enough to draw a few scattered chuckles from the cluster of young recruits nearby. Elena didn't flinch. Her fingers just tightened around the faded green beret resting in her lap, the last piece of her mother she still had. The cloth was worn, the edges frayed from years of service and battles most of these cadets had only heard about in history lessons. The midday sun beat down on the parade field of the St. Catherine Military Academy, casting sharp lines of shadow across the cracked concrete. The flags overhead snapped crisply in the breeze, a constant drumbeat above the low murmur of conversations and shifting boots. Nobody here really noticed her. Nobody except when it was convenient to mock the stories she carried. She sat alone on the bleachers, knees pressed together, the beret clutched tightly, her gaze fixed somewhere just beyond the horizon. A cluster of cadets, still half-boys themselves, leaned against the railing a few yards away, tossing glances back at her like she was a joke none of them wanted to tell out loud. The one who spoke, Cadet First Class Jared Monroe, smiled thinly, crossing his arms in a way that dared her to react. When she didn't, he shook his head in exaggerated pity. "Probably just found that thing in a thrift store," another recruit muttered under his breath, loud enough to make a few more laugh nervously. Elena lowered her gaze to the beret. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. Her mother, Commander Isabel Reyes, hadn't taught her to beg for respect. She had taught her that real honor never needed an audience. The voices around her faded into a low buzz as she closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling the rough weave of the beret under her fingertips. The scent of the parade field, sun-warmed metal, dust, a hint of freshly cut grass, wrapped around her like a second skin. A sharp blast of the Academy's loudspeaker cracked the air, announcing the start of the afternoon ceremonies. Everyone turned toward the main gates at the far end of the field. Elena looked up, blinking against the glare of the sun. Through the iron gates, a figure appeared, alone, but radiating a presence that shifted the atmosphere instantly. A man in full dress uniform strode forward, medals glinting against a deep blue coat. Silver stars adorned each shoulder, and the way he carried himself, posture straight as a blade, steps deliberate and heavy, made even the instructors along the edges of the field stiffen instinctively. General Marcus Aldridge, legendary, untouchable, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear across every academy and base in the state. And he wasn't looking at the parade stand. He wasn't looking at the instructors or the reviewing officers. He was walking straight toward Elena. The chatter died. The cadets fell silent. Even the flags seemed to pause mid-snap. Elena sat frozen, the beret clutched against her chest. As the general approached, Jared Monroe, the cadet who had mocked her, stepped slightly aside, his smirk faltering. General Aldridge stopped 3 feet in front of her. His boots clicked together. He drew himself to rigid attention, and then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand and rendered a perfect military salute to the girl no one had believed. Elena rose to her feet without a word, standing as straight as her shaking legs would allow. The general's eyes, sharp and unreadable, locked onto hers. A beat of silence stretched long and heavy across the field. Then his voice, deep, measured, unshakable, broke the stillness. "Commander Reyes trained leaders," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the academy. "And some legacies," he added, glancing meaningfully at the beret in her hands, "are carried more bravely than any rank can measure. No one moved, no one spoke. They simply watched, a field full of uniforms, standing witness to something larger than themselves." The general's salute had left a crater of silence across the parade field, but silence is a fragile thing. As General Aldridge moved on toward the dignitaries' stand, the cadets shifted, muttering in low, embarrassed tones. Some avoided looking at Elena altogether. Others exchanged glances heavy with unspoken words. Elena sat back down slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the beret back onto her lap. The warmth from the cloth seemed to seep into her skin, a quiet reassurance she clung to like a lifeline. Jared Monroe stood rigid for a moment, the smirk long wiped from his face. But bitterness finds a way to root itself deeper when shame threatens pride. He shoved his hands into his pockets and muttered, just loud enough for Elena to hear, "One salute doesn't make you a soldier." The words slipped through the heavy air like poison. Elena heard them. Everyone near her did. But she didn't look up. She simply tightened her hold on the beret again. Her gaze locked onto a distant flag fluttering against the blue sky. She wouldn't give him what he wanted. Not her anger. Not her tears. The ceremony continued. Names were read, officers fallen in service. Flowers placed in solemn procession at the memorial near the grandstand. Elena sat through it all, silent, unmoving, the boina a visible reminder of who she was and who they had forgotten. A tap on her shoulder startled her. She turned to find an academy instructor, Captain Rivers, stern-faced, clipboard in hand. "You're not authorized to sit with cadets," he said in a low, formal tone. "Visitors are supposed to remain behind the observation line." He wasn't rude, but he wasn't kind either. The words stung more than she expected. She had grown up hearing about this place, hearing about honor, about brotherhood, about respect. Yet here she was, not seen as part of it, not even allowed to sit among them. Elena nodded stiffly and stood up, the beret tucked under her arm. The walk to the back row felt longer than the entire parade ground itself. As she passed the cadets, Jared muttered again, without even looking at her, "Should have worn your mom's medals too. Maybe then you'd get a real seat." A few heads turned sharply toward him, this time not with amusement. The line between ignorance and cruelty had thinned dangerously. Elena said nothing. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Strength isn't how loud you shout, mija. It's how long you stand when no one is clapping." Reaching the back, Elena found an empty metal bench under the shadow of a cracked stone wall. She sat down, placing the beret carefully beside her. Around her, the celebration moved on. Awards were handed out, banners unfurled. Brass bands played triumphant marches that seemed hollow to her ears. The distance between her and the academy, the one her mother had dreamed she would one day belong to, felt like a canyon. And yet, Elena didn't weep. She didn't lower her head. She sat straight-backed, her hands resting quietly on her knees, the beret positioned neatly at her side. A quiet sentinel, invisible to most, but carrying a weight few could ever comprehend. And somewhere, beyond the noise and uniforms and medals, someone else was watching. The final call of the ceremony echoed across the parade field. A lone bugler playing taps, the somber notes melting into the afternoon heat. Cadets shifted uncomfortably in formation. Visitors adjusted their hats, murmuring in low tones. From her isolated bench, Elena sat unmoving, the beret resting against her chest like a shield. When the last note faded, an announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "At this time, any family members of the fallen may approach the memorial." There was a brief, uncomfortable pause. No one moved. Most of the families had stayed home. Some wounds were still too raw, others too far away. The organizers hadn't expected anyone. Elena rose slowly to her feet. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained calm. She picked up the beret with both hands, not like a relic, but like something living, and stepped forward. One step, then another. Across the cracked concrete, between neat rows of stiff uniforms and glittering brass, Elena walked alone. The field seemed impossibly wide. The distance stretched before her like a gauntlet. Whispers stirred at the edges. Some cadets turned to watch. Some instructors frowned, uncertain. Jared Monroe shifted his weight, his earlier confidence flickering into confusion. Elena didn't look at any of them. She kept her eyes fixed on the simple marble pedestal that served as the Academy's memorial, a plain slab etched with too many names. The beret trembled slightly in her hands. At the base of the memorial, a wreath of white lilies had been laid out, still fresh, still fragrant under the sun. Without hesitation, Elena knelt, one knee touching the scorched concrete. She placed the beret gently at the foot of the pedestal, smoothing it carefully, her fingers lingering just for a moment, a whisper of cloth against stone. Then she stood, no speech, no explanation, no glance at the watching crowd. She simply rendered a crisp salute, awkward but earnest. the way her mother had taught her as a child in the backyard. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath, and in that silence, something shifted. Not loudly, not with applause or cheers, but in the way backs straightened, in the way hats were removed without prompting, in the way silence grew heavy with meaning instead of discomfort. General Aldridge, standing among the officials, watched her with an expression that was part sorrow, part pride. One by one, instructors placed their hands over their hearts. Some cadets, hesitant at first, followed suit. Even Captain Rivers, clipboard forgotten at his side, straightened his uniform jacket and bowed his head. From the edges of the field, a few civilians, parents, siblings, strangers, wiped at their eyes, though no tears had been shed in speeches today. Elena lowered her salute, her arms dropping naturally to her sides. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply turned away from the memorial and walked back across the field, the same slow, steady steps she had taken forward. Only now, the field didn't seem so vast. The distance didn't seem so crushing. She walked past rows of cadets who parted slightly to let her through, not ordered to, but moved by something they couldn't quite name. And somewhere, just behind the low murmur of a returning breeze, she heard it. A single voice, quiet but firm. "Commander Reyes would be proud." Elena didn't turn to see who said it. She just kept walking, her head high, her heart steady. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself the smallest, softest smile. As Elena returned to the cracked bench at the edge of the parade field, she caught the shift in the air. Something small but undeniable. The instructors no longer avoided looking at her. The cadets no longer smirked. They stood straighter, their faces unreadable but no longer mocking. General Aldridge remained near the reviewing stand, conversing in low tones with the Academy's senior officers. His expression was tight, serious. Then, unexpectedly, he turned toward the assembled cadets. His voice, when it rang out, carried across the entire field without the need for a microphone. "Cadets," he said, "it is not the uniform that defines a soldier, nor the medals, nor the stripes." His gaze swept across the gathered youth, sharp and steady. "It is the weight they choose to carry when no one is watching. Silence, heavy, respectful." Then, to everyone's shock, General Aldridge descended from the stand, ignoring the protocol, the schedule, the eyes of the brass behind him. He crossed the field, boots striking the ground with the steady rhythm of a funeral march. He stopped directly in front of Elena. She stood instinctively, the beret now cradled carefully against her chest. The general's eyes, the same eyes that had seen wars, betrayals, sacrifice, softened just slightly as he looked at her. Without a word, he reached up and removed the Silver Star insignia pinned over his heart, the highest medal awarded in his early career. The polished metal caught the sunlight for a brief, brilliant second, and then, slowly, reverently, he pressed it into Elena's hands, curling her fingers over it. Gasps rippled through the field. No one spoke. No one dared. "For the courage," he said quietly, only for her to hear, "to stand when it would have been easier to shrink." Elena blinked rapidly, the metal warm against her skin. She opened her mouth to say something, to protest, perhaps, but the general shook his head slightly. Words were unnecessary. Behind them, movement stirred among the cadets. One by one, without being ordered, the young recruits straightened to attention. Hands rose in crisp, perfect salutes, not to the general, not to the instructors, but to Elena, the girl who had come alone, the girl who had been mocked, the girl who stood anyway. Jared Monroe, standing among them, hesitated. Shame burned his ears. His earlier arrogance now felt small, pathetic under the weight of real honor standing quietly before him. Slowly, painfully, he raised his hand in salute as well. No one looked at him. No one judged him. This moment wasn't about him. It was about the girl holding a green beret and a silver star, standing taller than the tallest cadet on the field. General Aldridge stepped back, allowing Elena to be seen fully without his shadow. The Academy's commander approached then, a stern-faced woman whose decorations spoke of decades of service. She nodded once to Elena, solemn. "You are always welcome here," she said simply. and that was all. It was enough. The field that had felt so foreign, so hostile, now stood witness to something rare. Not victory through conquest, not honor through medals, but dignity earned through silence, strength, and the refusal to bend. Elena bowed her head in quiet thanks. The beret and medal pressed close to her heart, and somewhere she thought she could almost feel her mother's hand on her shoulder, steady and proud. The ceremony concluded without another word from Elena. She didn't need to say anything. Actions, her mother once said, had always spoken louder than medals. The cadets began to disperse, moving in slow, thoughtful knots across the field. Parents hugged children. Instructors barked subdued commands, their voices softer than before. But Elena stayed where she was, standing near the memorial stone where her mother's name had been etched long before today's events. The green beret still rested at the foot of the slab, the silver star now pinned gently atop it, a quiet testament to sacrifice carried forward. Captain Rivers approached her from a respectful distance, clearing his throat once before speaking. "We'd like to place it permanently," he said, glancing toward the beret. "In the Hall of Valor, next to Commander Reyes's service portrait." Elena blinked back the sting in her eyes and nodded once. A promise fulfilled. Not shouted from rooftops, not demanded, earned. The captain handed her a small invitation card, simple, dignified, inviting her family to attend a future dedication ceremony. She thanked him in a voice so soft it nearly vanished into the warm afternoon air. General Aldridge lingered nearby, speaking quietly with the Academy's senior officers. From a distance, Elena could see a change in the way they carried themselves, not just toward her, but toward the uniform itself, as if, in remembering Commander Reyes, they had remembered something about themselves. At the edge of the field, Jared Monroe watched her. His cap was in his hands now, fingers nervously turning the brim over and over. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, not boldly, not arrogantly, but carefully, as one might approach a sacred place. He stopped a few feet away, cleared his throat awkwardly, and snapped to attention. A perfect salute. One held a beat longer than necessary. Elena regarded him for a long moment, then offered the smallest of nods. No anger, no triumph, only acknowledgement. He dropped his salute and backed away, head bowed, words unnecessary. Across the Academy's old courtyard, preparations were already beginning for another ceremony, one that would permanently include the name Reyes among the honored. But Elena turned away from the bustle. She found a quiet path lined with young trees, their leaves stirring in the soft breeze. There, at the base of one sapling, she knelt and placed her hand gently on the earth. Her mother's boina had been honored, her memory protected. But the true legacy, the one no Academy wall could contain, lived in moments like these, in the silent choice to stand tall when it mattered most. Elena closed her eyes, listening to the wind murmur through the branches, carrying with it echoes of past oaths, old salutes, and quiet promises kept. When she stood again, there was no fanfare, no applause. Only the soft shift of light across the field, the whisper of uniforms moving with new respect, and the beating of a heart that understood what real strength meant. As she walked away from the parade ground, the beret still warm against her chest, the narrator's voice, soft and steady, offered the final thought. True strength speaks in silence. And long after the sun dipped low behind the Academy walls, the empty parade field remembered.